It's now 10 a.m. In Geneva. It's time to officially launch this event. Excellencies, dear colleagues, welcome to this event organized by the Global Framework on Chemicals Secretariat with the support of the Geneva Environment Network. You have joined us for the second of two event series aiming to present the Global Framework on Chemicals Fund's first call for applications. We discussed indeed yesterday already a few things, and we might, what we discussed yesterday is that we might have even a few sessions as we saw a lot of interest from the audience during the discussion. So this second event aims to inform applicants about how to complete the application documents to access the fund. So let me remind those who were not with us yesterday that the Global Framework on Chemicals for a planet free of harm from chemicals and waste was adopted in September last year at the 5th International Conference on Chemicals Management, and it acknowledges the pollution and waste crisis as the third environmental planetary crisis alongside the crisis of climate change and the crisis of nature, land, and biodiversity loss. It complements indeed the global deals that set agreed goals and targets to tackle the triple environmental planetary crisis that humanity is currently facing, as we have the Paris Agreement for climate change and the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework for nature, land, and biodiversity loss. So now we have this Global Framework on Chemicals for pollution and waste. The Global Framework on Chemicals Fund, launched alongside the framework at the same conference, supports countries in implementing this international agreement. The fund launched its first call for applications at the beginning of this month, and that's what is bringing us together today. So we are joined today by Rebecca Shudaska from the Secretariat of the Global Framework on Chemicals, and by Catherine Theotokatos, coordinator of the special program on institutional strengthening of the chemicals clusters at UNEP's Chemicals and Health Branch. We generally refer to it as the special program, but it's important to remind the full name. So we'll be sharing during this session a series of documents and links that will help you understand better the process. And before we begin, let me remind everybody that the documents presented, a summary as well as the video of the event, will be made available as usual on the webpage of this event. And throughout the event, you can raise questions by using the Q&A box. You have a slide that is explaining how to access that box. And these questions will be used to feed the discussion as we did yesterday. I also want to add here that the transcript is also available in 100 languages, as indicated in this slide. So it's now my pleasure to turn to my right to Rebecca Shudaska for starting formally this event. Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Diana, and thank you to the Geneva Environment Network for giving us the possibility to present the Global Framework on Chemicals Fund here, both yesterday and today. Today's session, as Diana already said, will dive into the key concepts of the application documents. We'll give step-by-step information on how to apply results-based management approaches, and we'll also talk about how to fill in the budget form. Today's session will also be offered this afternoon in English with translations into French and Spanish. So if that is of interest to you, you're also more than welcome to join us this afternoon for the same session in 3 languages. Before I dive into details, turn it on. Sorry. Short technical hiccup, no worries. Before I dive into the details, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that we have developed a guidance document on the scope of the fund, as well as application guidelines, which will guide you through the application forms. We have 2 application forms or 2 documents online, which all applicants will need to fill in. One is project application form A, focusing on the project description, which is a Word document, and project application form B, which is an Excel file for the project budget. And we're also developing frequently asked questions. So for any questions that you have, we will be collecting them, and we'll also make FAQs available shortly. Now, let me dive into some of the key concepts of the application. First of all, we are following a results-based management approach, which is a tool for monitoring and managing a project, focusing on achieving results. It works a bit like a pyramid. So on the top, we basically have the high goal of the project, which we also call the outcome on the right-hand side of my slide, which is kind of split up into several outputs, which are direct results of the project. And these, once again, split up into multiple activities, which are concrete tasks and actions that are being done within a project. You can find this in the project application form A in section 2, where we also ask you to fill in and describe activities, outputs, as well as the project outcome. Furthermore, you will also find examples of good and weak descriptions of all of these in the application guidelines, which I referenced earlier. In the initial application, we do not ask you to fill in a complete logical framework, but once projects have been submitted and have been accepted by the executive board in March, the project applicants will need to develop a logical framework. So I would like to mention that this case, that this will need to be developed shortly after the project has been approved, and you can already find the log frame document online. So if it is easier for you to develop this directly, you're also more than welcome to do so and submit it with your application. The main difference or the main addition of the log frame is that we're also asking for indicators and means of verification. So this one will be to show how you measure your project, your progress, where you started and where you aim to be at the end of your project. Another key concept that we use is the concept of co-financing and beneficiary contributions. As I already said yesterday, each project should aim to achieve at least 25% of co-financing, which can also include in-kind contributions. And basically, this refers to all the ways in which your organization is supporting the implementation of a project, both monetary and non-monetary contributions. I've put a few examples of these on the slide. So these can be office space or equipment, or also staff time. What is very important is that there is a separate tab on the budget application form to include beneficiary contributions, as you are not applying for these through the project money. And you can see this on the next slide. So if you open this Excel file, project application form B, and go through to the third sheet, this is where you will put in your beneficiary contributions. And you can see that this sheet is also split up by the outputs of the project, as well as certain categories to support you in referencing these appropriately. Another important aspect of the project application form is the sustainability of projects. This is also a minimum criteria of all fund projects. So we've tried to put forward several things that you can consider when developing a project to make sure that what you're doing in a project actually has sustainable results that go beyond the financing that is available through the fund. One of these is connecting project activities with national priorities. Another one is to connect these to the national budget. You can also consider making any product, such as training material or other results, available beyond the project itself, but also look at building financial capacities, such as tax-based or fee-based mechanisms. These are just a few examples. And please consider all of what I'm presenting in your local or regional project context and adjust it accordingly. Another aspect that we are focusing on is gender and safeguards. I won't go into all of these details, but I do want to stress that each project needs to have a gender-sensitive approach and consider gender aspects throughout its project cycle. This is very important, as many projects show that if you examine gender roles when you develop a project, that this can also, or that this definitely contributes to having effective solutions. So when you are developing a project proposal, please look at aspects such as the participation and representation of women and men, both in project activities as well as decision making. Please consider the different needs of the different stakeholders. Please also think of gender sensitive results so that you're not reinforcing gender inequality, and also consider collecting disaggregated data. This does not only have to be broken down by male and female, but can also be other aspects relevant to your project, such as geographical distribution, income level, profession, and many other aspects. This is very helpful to clearly understand how your project is affecting your stakeholders. To give you a bit of a sense of how this can work in your project development, we highly encourage you to take a close look at your stakeholders. Who is doing what? When are they doing it? Where are they doing it? Who has access to certain things? Who decides? How do they decide? Who is involved? Who might gain and who might lose from the activities of your project? Now we will dive into a few examples of how you can put activities into your project application form, as well as how to budget for them. These are 3 different examples. As I said before, or as it also says on the slide, these are only examples. So please do not copy these, but adjust them to your specific project and make use of these examples the way they are appropriate. So we have a colleague here, her name is Nala, and she's drafting an application for the fund. She has defined an overall outcome and is now looking at her outputs and activities. The output which she's looking at first is establishing a project secretariat to support her project. And one of the activities she wants to do under this output is to hire a project manager. In project application form A, the Word document, she will put this under section 2, where she defines output 1, and she also describes 2 of the activities. I've only put the titles in here, but you can see that you will also need to provide a brief description, as well as further explanation on each output, as well as each activity. So we have 1 output, establishing a project secretariat, and 2 activities. 1 is developing the terms of reference for the project manager, and then the next activity is hiring the project manager. So you can see here that these activities are very small packages, which all contribute to the first output that we have. We also need to reflect this output and the activities in the project application form B, which is the Excel file, and we're looking at the second tab or the second sheet here. You can see at the top of this sheet that there are different categories, as well as different years in which the budget is split up, and you will need to fill in your budget accordingly. So let's look at these different classes, which you saw in the sheet before. I will not read out the full text, but you can see that basically we have 4 major categories. The first one is staff and personnel costs, which are staff of your organization working for the project, as well as consultants, administration. So basically everything that falls in this category. Then we have contractual services, which are basically services related to procurement procedures. We put specifically here that we are talking a lot about meetings and workshops, which have a venue, for example, as well as things like printing or publication. Then we have equipment, which is non-consumables, which you may need for your project, as well as the category of travel for any per diems paid for tickets or fuel costs. And you can have a further look at this. This is also in the application guidelines. So coming back to Nala's example, if she's calculating the budget for her activity for hiring a national project manager, she will need to calculate the individual costs for this activity, insert these into the budget table. So she wants to hire this consultant or this national project manager for 3 years in total. And his monthly salary is $2,000 US. So for each year, she will need to calculate this $2,000 US per month, which leads to $24,000 US per year, which is a total of $72,000 US for 3 years. You can see on the bottom of the slide that she puts this under the category staff and personnel costs. She's put the different activities there. So you can see in the red box, this is the activity for hiring the national project manager, and she's put the $24,000 US per year of this budget table. Let's jump to the second activity that Nala, or the second output that Nala wants to do, which is strengthening the legal frameworks on chemicals management. Under this, she has 2 activities. One is conducting a legislative analysis, and the second one is drafting a package of recommendations. Once again, she fills these into project application form A and adds additional descriptive information on each output and activity. I would also like to draw your attention in this slide to the fact that we're also asking you to fill in the proposed costs here, which should match the total costs of each activity. So this is basically copy pasting from the Excel file. So we have 2 activities here, and for each activity we need to calculate the appropriate budget. So for the legislative analysis, we assume that we need a consultant to do this work in the first year for a total of 2 months. So assuming that his salary is $5,000 US per month for 2 months, we would need to budget for the total cost of $10,000 US. The second activity is drafting a package of recommendations, where we will also hire a consultant for 4 months of the second year. He has the same salary as the first consultant, and this results in total cost of $20,000 US. So activity 1 will be done in year 1. And you can see this on this slide, that we are filling this in again under staff and personnel costs, but in year 1. The second activity will take place in year 2. So we fill this in as a separate activity under year 2. And you can see that the Excel file will automatically calculate a total cost of this output of $30,000 US, which is the sum of the 2 activities. The third and final activity that Nala is planning is strengthening the national capacity to manage chemicals along the textile value chain. And under this, she would like to conduct 1 activity, which is conducting a training on extended producer responsibility. She assumes that she will have 50 participants in this event, which will come from the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Finance, as well as producers. Once again, this is how she would put this in the project application form A. And she will also need to budget for this. So this activity is basically split into 2 different costs. One is the travel costs for paid participants. So the project will cover the travel costs for 20 participants, so 20 of the 50 participants. And we are assuming that the travel costs per person per day is $150 US. We calculate that for 5 days, which results in $15,000. We also need to calculate for a meeting room or for the conference costs. The conference will be for 50 people. We assume that this will cost $40 per day, that the conference takes 4 days, so it results in $8,000. You might be confused by the 4 and the 5 days. This is because we usually calculate an additional day for travel cost coverage. So we have the costs of the conference room, which are contractual services, which we fill into the appropriate part of the Excel file. And once again, we also have travel and accommodation costs, which go under the final category. Under this, you can see that this is all under output 3, activity number 1, and all of this is automatically calculated within the Excel file. Finally, the project also has operating costs, which cover for operating costs, and we have a maximum of 5%, which we can use here. You will need to manually enter the amount here. So you can either do a short Excel calculation, or well, you can also calculate it and just enter these costs, and then these will automatically be added to the total costs of your project. Finally, you can see that this should be the result of this exercise. So on the one hand, you should have an application form where you've filled in the details, as well as the budget form, where you can see that we've added all the numbers and that the rest is basically calculated by the Excel file. Please make sure that you've entered all of the numbers appropriately, and make sure that that the calculations make sense. And with that, I've finished this presentation, and we're open to any questions that you have.
Very good, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Actually, we have already some questions.
We have
so
already.
Let's start.
Yeah.
Let me put us here bigger. And as we start, can I kindly ask the colleagues to put quickly the slide with the transcript, because we had a few people asking how can we access the various languages. So our colleague will put it on screen. So have a look how you can access, and then you can also put wait a few seconds, and then you put the one on the Q&A box. And so among the questions, we have people asking, where can I find the summary of the event of yesterday, the video, and the documents that were presented, and for the one of today. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the event, all this information is available on the webpage of the events. And I think my colleague will be sharing, or has already shared, the links in the chat. And it's the same link that you see on each of the images on the screen. So if you type that link, you will access the video and the summary of the events. We have a few other questions, so let me read them.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of them is if the log frame of the project proposed is not good, will the Secretariat be helping to develop it for if acceptable? And then we have another question from our colleagues of OECD. In the budget, you were still presenting when the colleague was putting the question. In the budget for an output, if there is some in-kind co-financing, such as staff time, does it have to be inserted in the budget? So let's start with those questions.
Yeah, so for the log frame, so basically for now we have the application guidelines. They're very detailed about the log frame, and we kindly ask you to work through those application forms. We do not have the capacity right now to support each and every applicant to review their log frames and do a lot of back and forth work on this. If you do need support specifically on something, or if you have a question, then please reach out to us as soon as possible. Would you like to add to this, Catherine?
Just to point out again that the log frame is not a required part of this application.
Yes.
The intention would be that the log frame would be done for the projects that are approved. And at that stage, there should be more capacity to help formalize a very strong, solid log frame there.
Yes. And for the second question regarding the in-kind contributions, I said this at the beginning of the presentation. So the budget form consists of several sheets, and we were mainly looking at the sheet number 2, but there is a separate sheet number 3, where you will be asked to enter all of the in-kind contributions per output, and that is the place to reflect these.
Very good. So let's move on as we have a few more questions. So again, questions very similar to some of the questions that were asked yesterday. Are intergovernmental organizations encouraged to apply? Additionally, are there any pertinent focus areas? Another questions are on the type of projects that can be submitted. Are the activities for the establishment of a poison control center acceptable for this call? And yesterday there was a question about the overhead costs. So this is something we have also discussed yesterday.
Yeah.
Mentioning here 5% operates cost. So what is the percentage of management costs?
So IGOs can or are not eligible to apply directly, but they can be an implementing or partner organization, and then they need to be reflected in the application form. Regarding focus areas, that's what I talked about yesterday. So the executive board has defined a set of minimum and desirable criteria, as well as a set of strategic priorities. So I would invite you to have a look at the scoping document as well as yesterday's presentation. Regarding poison control centers, we had a couple of questions yesterday regarding what can be funded, what cannot be funded. Those are all questions which the executive board will have a look at, because this is very, very specific to each project and each application. So no matter what application you submit, you will always need to bring forward a clear narrative of why you're doing this activity, why you have these outputs. And I think that is the space where you will need to give a reason of why these are appropriate for your project context.
Anything you want to add, Catherine?
I think that's all clear. That's quite specific questions to the GFC.
Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of questions are coming up. So let me take a few more, and then I take the others. I have a question about the criteria for the nomination of the chief of project, the lead of the project. What are the criteria? If it is necessary to hire is it necessary to hire the consultant for a project, or the project can lead by stakeholders, institutions? There are questions here that are not very clear, so maybe we start with those and I go to the other ones that are public.
So regarding the project lead, there we don't have a set of criteria of who can lead a project, but yesterday I said that the project lead is the person who has who basically is in charge of managing the complete project, is the person who engages with the different people involved in the project, is the person who reports back to us at the Global Framework on Chemicals Secretariat. So this person will need to have the time, the capacity, the understanding of how to manage a project. As I said, there's no kind of tick box for that, but please take that into consideration. The projects have or will run for up to 3 years. So ideally, we would like to see that that person can also be committed to the whole lifetime of the project. Yes, and there's no requirement to hire any consultant if you have the capacities to do certain activities. As you saw in my first example, for example, writing the terms of reference was not related to any costs. That was simply done by one of the members of the project or possibly the project lead. And that would, for example, also be an in-kind contribution, because you're not calculating for the staff costs of a regular staff member who's writing the terms of reference. And as I said, if you have someone who can do the legal analysis, or you have someone who's writing a report, who's, let's call it in-house, then that is absolutely possible, and that is definitely possible. You do not need to hire a lot of external support. But Catherine, if you have experience from the special program, then please add to this.
The special program is maybe slightly different, because we are aimed at institutional strengthening. And so a lot of the countries that apply don't actually have the in-house capacity. So we do have, it's quite common for us to see requests for consultants in our projects. But again, if you do have the in-house expertise, that's even better. Yeah. But there may well be in a project some very specific technical expertise that is required that you might need to outsource from a consultant.
So again, we have a few other questions that are similar to the ones that were asked yesterday. One about language. Can the project be submitted in French? Yesterday, you told us you were very strict on the language. So, where do you see the role of NGOs and civil society in such proposals? Can they co-applicants or lead applicants, or it has to be mainly the countries, the member states? This is also something we have largely discussed yesterday. And another similar, there are various questions similar and go in the same direction. Can anyone do the submission for the country apart the national focal point? So that you were very clear on the role of the national focal point yesterday in our discussion. Then we have a few questions more focused on what you presented today. When putting beneficiary contributions, country contributions in the budget, what kind of evaluation rates value should be used? Is there a reference for the value cost of meeting rooms, expert rooms, etc. that can be used? Can infrastructure development costs categorize as contractual or in-contractual? Another question on those on what you can add in these budgets in case of to include activities that involve travel in the costs. Could transport be included? Hospitality, all the catering related costs for the stakeholders, including the DSA. Another question related to the costs. Understanding eligible countries are only least developing countries, LDCs, small island states, or countries with economics in transition. Can the budget include any cost for support staff based in high-income countries? And another question related to these costs. Do you have criteria or limits to calculate the cost of activities that involve the travel of stakeholders? So a lot of travel-related questions on costs. I stop here because I see a few more coming up. I hope,
yeah, lots of questions. So some of those are from or came up yesterday. So for now, we do require all applications to be submitted in English only. So unfortunately, you will not be able to submit your application in a different language for this round of applications. For NGOs, so as I said yesterday, civil society organizations can submit their application on an exceptional basis. So basically the main focus or a priority is government organizations, but on an exceptional basis, civil society organizations can apply. They will need support from their national focal point. And this brings me to the next question. So not only national focal points can submit an application, but all applications will need support by the national focal point. So please engage with your national focal point early on. And we also see the national focal point to have the role of coordinating activities. So to have a look if there's several applications to see whether there's a possibility to combine these. The Global Framework on Chemicals is a multi-stakeholder and a multi-sectoral approach. So any possibilities of getting different stakeholders together in one application is of high interest. Then we have different things of whether certain things are covered. I don't know if I can hand over to Catherine right away.
I'll try and answer some of them, and just speaking from the experience we've had with the special program. So in the special program, and for the moment at least in the GFC, we don't have established tables of rates for beneficiary contributions. The intention is that the applicant in the country knows best what your costs are. And so it's up to you to assess what those rates would be. In the special program, we do have percentages allocated for different cost categories. I don't believe that's in place yet for the GFC.
We put recommendations.
Okay, so you may want to take that into account, and that goes to how the budget is balanced across the different cost categories. But it's because the national context varies so widely from one country to another, whether it's venue hire or travel costs, for instance. It didn't make sense to us in the special program to say, okay, this is the range within which those costs should be. So I hope that answers that question. There was a question about infrastructure development costs. This isn't something we've dealt with in the special program because we do not support infrastructure development itself. We do institutional strengthening, which is different. It's going to be something that I think your executive board will need to make a decision on the understanding that if infrastructure is to be developed, you're likely to need a company coming in to do it for you, then it would fall under contractual services in the budget, because that is outsourced through the procurement process. Travel costs, there was a question about whether transport and hospitality would be included in travel. Transport costs, and there is a slide on it in the presentation under the class explanations. Transport costs do fall under travel. And I'm looking at it now. It says all meeting costs, including travel per diem and tickets, as well as road, train, fuel, and vehicle or boat rental costs. The hospitality costs would either, thank you, that's it, exactly. The hospitality costs, would either be covered under the per diem, but if it's something that's outside of the per diem costs, then it would come under the contractual services. And usually then if you're hiring a venue to do a workshop, that venue is also then providing the coffee breaks or whatever. So that will all be rolled into the costs of that contractual services under that. An interesting question on support staff for a developing country based in high income countries. It's not something we've ever had to consciously consider. To a certain degree, that is what a lot of the consultants in special program projects are. A lot of them are international consultants who may fly in for a short period or who may be contracted to work from their home base. So it hasn't been something that has been consciously considered, but I think it would be possible. And then the limits on travel costs, we've already said you've got the recommended cost categories.
I think one more thing, or what I said before, is also giving the reasoning behind something. So I think that's very important, and together with the aspect of sustainability. So I think, or the board really wants to see projects that have an effect beyond the lifetime of a project. So this means that you will always need to show why you're doing a specific activity and how this links to long-term sustainability.
So let's move to the next questions. There is a question about the budget maximal limits. There are various questions very similar on what is of more advantage to have a regional or a national or maybe international project, or the idea will be more would be more important the priority of what we submitted. And similarly, can a different organization that is working in chemicals and related fields from the same country apply for a project with the different projects. So it's having a similar project but coming from two different institutions in the same country. This is also something we have touched on yesterday. Sorry, I'm also trying to interpret the question.
Yeah.
So I'm just switching to French because the question was issued in French and you replied in English. Dans cet appel à projet, il faut soumettre les appels en anglais. Donc, d'autres langues ne seront pas acceptées. And I'm going back to English. What should be the procedure to combine multiple applications? So we are still in this applied for CSOs, private sector, before approving by the national focal point. This is also something we touched on yesterday. And then we have a question that is, again, somebody presenting a very specific project and would like to have your opinion. So let me mention the colleague who is visibly from Dar es Salaam. What is your opinion about the proposal to establish a national regional center of excellence for poison control, as well as chemicals, products, and waste management in Dar es Salaam for countries surrounding Tanzania and shipping their chemicals through Tanzania? We have land available where several centers of excellence are being built, which could allow constructive cross interaction. So this is a very specific question.
Okay, so for the budget, so project funding is available for between 300,000 and 800,000 US dollars in total. So this is what will come at the very bottom of the Excel file of the sheet. There's a lot of questions about regional, international, national projects. So if you are applying for a regional project or like a larger project, then please take into consideration that you will need to show us what the benefits are of this approach. You will also need to show us how the project will be managed among these different stakeholders and really show why does it make sense for you to use this approach. Then for multiple projects under the same title, basically, the executive board will decide on a project by project proposal. So they look at each proposal, they discuss it. Of course, they get further information on what other projects have been done in this field, and they consider that, of course. But as I said before, there's a high emphasis on multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder approaches. So yeah, the question would be of why are there two separate projects that have the same title?
If I can just jump in there, I think just to emphasize, the multi-stakeholder element is very, very important in the GFC. And it really strengthens your project if you can have those discussions and come up with one combined project. Presumably, all of the different entities are planning to do the same thing, need to be speaking to each other anyway. And you would presumably be partners in any project at the end of the day. So rather come up with one coherent project where your roles are clearly defined rather than competing with each other essentially for funding.
Yes, thank you, Catherine. And that is what I said before. Thank you for the slide. Yes, so basically, if you have these different stakeholders, then please show us how they can work together and develop a project application that shows this multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral approach. Furthermore, the question of multiple applications. So as I said before, the national focal point is important and will also need to coordinate these applications. So this may also be the person to talk to look at if there's multiple project applications, can we put them together? Does it make sense for us to look at this from a higher angle? How can we work together with this approach? And regarding the specific question, this is something for the board to decide. You are more than welcome to email us and we can have a look at this as well. That's all I can say to that for now.
Okay, so let's move with the next questions. Maybe somebody here who needs more clarification, understanding that the NGOs can apply for an exceptional basis with clear support for the national focal point. Can you give an example of what kind of exceptional basis this will mean? Under what kind of conditions do you imagine the board would see the need for an NGO to apply rather than a national government? Right. And another question, do we have to submit both project document and project budget detail at the same time?
Yes, so for the second question, yes, you will be asked to submit both of these documents as well as letters of support. I talked about this yesterday, so you can have a look at the slide. And this is also in those application documents. It clearly says which documents you will need to submit. And this also depends on which type of organization you are. Regarding the exceptional basis for NGOs, as you rightly said, this is for the executive board to decide on. I think what is important is to show the benefit of your application and to show, well, basically I can reflect this question back to you, to ask you to show us why this is something that your NGO can work on, and then the executive board will consider this.
So we have somebody actually mentioning that getting government support, the letter is sometimes difficult, especially when the budget of the project is added to the project. What could you do to ease the business for civil society? Then we have specific questions on examples of projects, if they are eligible, that I will wait before I ask you, but I'm not sure I have asked you this. Could you please provide information on types of equipment and criteria that should be included in the project application? Additionally, is there a budget allocated for a possibility to supply equipment for recycling or waste treatment? Best practice for a country lacking hazardous chemical treatment infrastructure? And does the global framework cover such funding? This is also something we have touched a little bit yesterday. And then specifically on the project, we have somebody who is a French speaker asking if a project on fighting fraud on pesticides, contrefaçon now is it eligible? Now the contrefaçon doesn't come to me in English. I'm looking at my colleagues. Fake, sorry.
Pesticide, fake,
even,
yeah.
Fake pesticides, yeah.
So for the focal points, the Global Framework on Chemicals Secretariat is also currently working with focal points to look at their exact role within the Global Framework on Chemicals. As I said yesterday as well, please reach out and contact your focal point as soon as possible. And you may also email us in case you have severe difficulties on this. Regarding equipment, so the recommended amount, I believe, is 10% of the budget. However, once again, this is a lot about the narrative you are putting forward. We're not an infrastructure fund per se, but we're looking at sustainability, at strengthening things that go beyond, looking also at the scope of the fund, which I mentioned yesterday.
Can I just come in on equipment? One of the things to consider if you're putting a substantial amount in your budget for equipment costs is make it clear how that equipment is going to be maintained after the end of the project. So when this funding ends, who's going to look after that equipment and what will happen with it?
Yeah. And the other question regarding whether a certain project topic is eligible, such as the question we just received, that is also up to you to tell us more about that, to tell us why that fits within the scope of the fund, and to put that forward in your application.
Thank you very much. So two interesting questions. One that we touched also a little bit yesterday, it's on academic institutions. Can they also apply to this fund, particularly those who are that are public or governmental academic institutions? And then for the colleagues who are not coming from English countries, when they submit the project in English, do they really have to have all the annexes and all the administrative documents of the organization translated also in English? For example, a French-speaking country, the question comes from a French-speaking country colleague.
Yeah. So academic institutions fall under the civil society networks understanding. So that is also something for the board to then have a look at. And that is also, I think, if you're applying as an academic institution specifically, then I think you would also give, or as I said before, for the NGO as well, you will need to give a reasoning behind why you are the appropriate organization for this project. Regarding the English and French, I think I would go to Catherine, because this is an administrative experience question.
It's quite a broad question. I think it depends partly on what annexes you're talking about. Ideally, you would want the annexes in English because these documents are going to be considered by the executive board when they review the application and take funding decisions. That said, if it is the type of document, so an incorporation document for an NGO, for instance, that only exists in French, that becomes far more relevant if your project is approved at the time when we in UNEP then have to get approval to sign an agreement with you. And at that stage, you would definitely need to have it in English to go through the due diligence approval process. So the earlier you can get the documents to us in English or to the Secretariat in English, the better.
Mm-hmm.
There are no more questions, I have to confess. Maybe it's something I would like to, now I see some more things in the chat, so let me check what is in there. But yesterday, we didn't come too much in the discussion today. You mentioned that you are preparing a FAQ document. Yeah. So I think it's important to remind everybody that you will be feeding this document with the questions that were raised yesterday and today.
Yes.
So when do you expect that document to be ready?
Well, I think it's going to be a living document. So I think by probably the beginning of next week, we will have an initial set of this FAQ available. But this will also be a bit of a living document, depending also on what questions we get. So yeah, that's what we are aiming for right now. And this is also a reminder that if you have any questions, but also if you have anything that is or that you would want to discuss, then please reach out to us as early as possible. Don't wait until the 26th of January, as we will be very busy with starting to screen applications and to get them ready for the board. So please, if you have anything you would like to discuss, especially regarding like specific things that might only apply to your organization, we see this as a first, this is the first round of applications. There are a few things which are not, which are things the executive board needs to decide. There are a few things that are very specific to certain countries. So if you're unclear of something, then please drop us an email and we will get back to you.
In the meantime, there are more questions that came in. So is it eligible for the focal point to submit more than one project? That's one of the questions. And the other one is a question that we have already replied to. When putting beneficiary contributions, country contributions in the budget, what kind of valuation rates value should be used? Is there a reference for the value cost of meeting rooms, expert rooms, etc.? We touched a little bit on that before.
Yeah.
So maybe it's important.
Yes. So for the second question, Catherine just said that we don't have a table for that, but this is up to your country context to define this. Regarding the focal point and more than one project, once again, the executive board will look at each application separately. They have not put any regional or any cap on the amount of projects, but of course they will be looking to make a fair distribution of projects, and they will probably also consider why there are two applications. So we highly encourage you to put a focus on putting together a multi-stakeholder, high-quality application.
So there is a question about how you can be contacted, and indeed we have a slide with the email where you can reach out to the Secretariat. So we will close the event by putting this slide online. And I'm looking here to see if we have more questions, but I think we are really now coming to the end of the questions that were raised. Maybe one more. It's still around the same question about the costs. Emily, for you, it's
monitoring and evaluation.
Costs to be included under, should they be included under operating costs? And what about the audits? Where to include those costs?
Yeah, that is at the very bottom of the Excel file. Yeah, can we maybe put up this
budget slide
of the complete budget table, which is in example 1? Example 1. Oh, yeah.
No, sorry, the budget form slide, project application form B, second tab. It was early on in the presentation.
This one.
Yes, this one. You can see at the bottom that there is a section on monitoring, evaluation, and audit. This is where you would put those costs. We have recommendations of how much to budget for that. That is in the application guidelines. So yes, please put these in the budget, and they are part of the total budget and should not be more than the maximum of $800,000 US. So they contribute to those.
So will the board have time to go through all the applications? For now, you told us yesterday that you haven't yet received the applications.
Yeah.
But if you receive thousands of them, you'll be able to go through all of them.
So what will happen after the closure of the application deadline at the end of January is that we as a Secretariat do a screening of the application. We do not value them, but we have a look at them and see if that they're all eligible and complete. And then we forward them to the executive board. Right now, we have scheduled the board to meet for several days, so they should have enough time to consider these applications. That's what we're planning for right now. And we will adjust our schedule accordingly, depending on the amount of applications.
And if I could just, as a word of encouragement, please make sure that your application is complete so that it doesn't delay submission. Because you don't want it not to go forward to the board because you're missing a critical document.
Yes.
Very good. We have a last slide with the email, so I can kindly ask the colleagues to put that on screen. As I think it's now time to close the event because there are no more questions.
Yeah.
I mean, there are questions about where can we find the slide, where can we find the documents. So you have, sorry, on the webpage of this event, you have the link on the screen. It has been shared on the chat. You have you can access through that on the website the presentations that were presented, the video of this event that you can share with your colleagues. And as I mentioned, we might add 1 or 2 more sessions in this series, as we saw there was a lot of interest that came out. There's this document, the FAQ document that the Secretary would really issue that is going to be very useful. I also myself got a few questions from colleagues. Can we, as UNEP, apply for the funding? So go back to these events, go back to the FAQ that is going to be presented. You will find there questions. Write to the Secretariat. You see there the email is now on screen. And we look forward to see applications coming in. Yes. And meet you maybe at the next session of this series. It was very interesting and to be here with you. We learn also ourselves a lot here in the team. And anything else you would like to add, Rebecca?
Once again, thank you to the Geneva Environment Network for giving us this opportunity. And as I said at the beginning, we have this session again in the afternoon with simultaneous translation into French and Spanish. So please share this with any colleagues you think this would be relevant to. Thank you very much, and we look forward to lots of good and interesting applications.
Yes, thank you very much. And maybe, yes, thank you to you, Rebecca and Catherine, for all your inputs. And I would like just to unfold all the attendees who stay with us until now, or who will rewatch the video of this event. Just a little bit of publicity. We have some upcoming events that could be of interest for this audience. We are organizing a lot of events in the run-up to Busan, where the last session of the IMC, the colleagues working on establishing this new agreement to end plastic pollution, will take place. So we have a few events that are already announced on our website and a few more coming up. But we are also discussing other topics. So stay tuned, visit our website, and we look forward to see you online or in person at our upcoming event.